Welcome to the Humans of Hospitality podcast. I know so many of you listening to this show love your local bar, your local restaurant, maybe your local hotel, and have so many fond memories of time in hospitality businesses. This is the podcast where we get to chat to the human beings behind the scenes of that industry. Maybe the chefs or the bakers or the coffee roasters or the gin distillers or the craft brewers or the entrepreneurs, but all doing an amazing job of making sure that hospitality stays interesting and the big, dull, formulaic brands do not take over our high street. Please enjoy the show. In this week's podcast, I am chatting to legendary chef and restaurateur Mark Hix from Hix and Food Rocks. Now, if you decided to open a restaurant that focused on oysters and meat on the bone, you probably wouldn't have done that in the year 2008. First, there was the financial crisis and credit crunch, and then there was still this lingering memory of the meat on the bone ban triggered by BSE a few years before. Mark Hicks's decision was perhaps all the more surprising because the job he was leaving, executive head chef of the Caprice restaurant group, which included famous venues like the Ivy and J Sheekey, was the sort of plum role other chefs would have given their IT for. But it turned out very well in the end. His Hix Oyster and Chop House marked the start of an award-winning family of Hix restaurants in London and in Dorset. And it very much put Mark in the forefront of the modern British food movement, celebrating farmers, food producers and fishermen in his menus and in his annual Food Rocks festival in the beautiful Lyme Regis. Discover how it all happened for a boy who was more interested in golf than food, and then discovered he was rather good at cooking after all. I very much hope you enjoy this week's conversation. Okay, Mark Hix, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. Very much appreciated.
Pleasure.
And can you? People will be, groaning when they hear this because I keep saying I come to all these incredible places recording this podcast.
Yeah, it's a terrible view.
It is. Yeah. Earlier on, I was stood in a field surrounded by 800 cows. By contrast, yeah. Can you just explain where in the world are we?
No, we're in my sort of back garden or front garden. I haven't really got a back garden.
the garden. Yeah.
I've got a garden downstairs, but that's sort of full of herbs and salads.
Your
and
kitchen
things,
garden. Yeah. Okay, but where in the world? So we're
we're in
Charmouth?
Sunny Charmouth.
Yeah. Right on the still the Jurassic coast here, is it?
It is, yeah. So this is a great. I mean, I was brought up around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, in West Bay, like 8 miles away.
Yeah.
And didn't really, when I first moved to London to sort of, work out what I really wanted to do in life.
Yeah.
I sort of slightly ignored Dorset and whatever. So later in life, probably 10, 12 years ago, I thought, it was a good place to be brought up and
really appreciate
a good place to maybe set up a business.
Yeah, and got lured back. Yeah. I was chatting to Giles from Oliver Town. Do you know those guys?
Yeah.
And he was saying that kind of piece of elastic with people in Dorset who they often disappear. I was the same. I lived in London for 10 years, but there's something about this part of the world that just lures you back.
When I was younger, London was the place that sort of lured you into, because there wasn't much going on down here.
Yeah.
35 years ago.
Yeah, no, true.
So, you had to sort of go to London.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right, actually. In fact, I think food and drink in the UK in general was bad, even in London, if you go back far enough. So, now that London's trailblazing, I guess it's rippled out.
Yeah, so when I first moved to London, it was kind of hotels, and there wasn't that many restaurants that, of note, really.
No. Okay. So, beautiful part of the world. I can literally see probably, 15 miles to the east down the Dorset coastline. So, beautiful spot. So, thanks for having us. Just to go back, so you were a local boy out on the fishing boats, were you? What was it? What was your first interest in food? I read something about you necking scallops in the school playground. That's not everybody's upbringing, is it? So.
No, yeah. So, when I was primary school,
really?
My friends' parents had fishing boats and stuff.
Right.
And one of our, favourite sort of playground snacks was little queen scallops.
Yeah.
That my friend Mark, his mum used to sort of just cook them very simply.
Okay.
No preparation involved. Put them in a little polystyrene cup for us with all the frills on and the sort of the bits you don't eat. with a bit of vinegar, really.
Wow.
Sarson's vinegar, yeah.
Yeah, really? That's amazing. Was there many kids in the school, or were you pretty unique being the ones eating scallops?
No, we were the only ones.
Were you?
Yeah.
You were special. And that was the start of your that was the start of your destiny. And it was catering college in Weymouth. So what made you choose that then? When you were cooking before that? Or?
You know, you sort of get to the 5th year at school, you're not quite sure what to do. You know, I didn't have a clue really, you know, what my future career was going to be. And 5th year at school, there was an option to do metalwork or domestic science. We were doing metalwork already.
Okay.
And I hated metalwork. I loved doing woodwork because
Right.
it was kind of soft and you could sort of see your end goal, if you like.
Yeah.
But metalwork, you'd end up sort of filing away at a piece of metal and getting a dodgy old keyring at the end of it, 6 weeks later.
Yeah.
So it wasn't for me, metalwork.
Okay.
Really.
Yeah. That got rid of that.
Although these days I sort of love, things made out of metal and things. But
Yeah.
So about 3 of us decided to do the other option, domestic science,
Okay.
thinking that we'd be in a classroom full of girls.
I was going to say, I had deja vu. I was chatting, do you know William Curley,
Yeah.
chocolatier? I was chatting to him a few weeks ago. Exactly the same thing. He was doing woodwork and he wasn't particularly enjoying it. And he looked over at the domestic science and there was something like 15 girls and 2 guys in the class, and that was his motivation. There seems to be this whole cult history of chefs who got into it because there were
and
girls
then
there.
so the 3 of us turned up on day 1, and there was 3 of us and the teacher, because all of the girls decided to do metalwork.
For the other reason. Oh, damn. Okay, so you passed like ships
But
in
we
the night.
we sort of did it for a year and didn't really take it seriously.
Right.
I started working in the pub, sort of washing up and stuff in
Yeah.
the holidays and weekends to earn some extra money.
Right.
And it got to the end of the 5th year when you have to make the decision, whatever that might be for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And didn't really know what to do.
Down here, normally farming.
Yeah, so
presumably,
one of
was it?
my exactly. Yeah. So one of my dad's friends said, "You've been working in the kitchen. You're doing domestic science. Blah blah blah. Why don't you go to catering college?" So I thought, okay, that's my only option.
Right.
Out
Okay.
or in.
Had you shown any skill before that in cooking? Were you any good at it? Or?
Well, not really. It was just one of those things you did.
Yeah.
And so the minute I went to catering college, we had a great lecturer and still a very good friend, Laurie Mills,
Okay.
who had worked in London
Right.
and always talked about, what he did in London and where he worked and stuff, and was always talking about food and cooking. So that sort of got me into the sort of food side, being in a sort of catering college environment. And we used to do this thing called electives on a Thursday, I think it was a Thursday afternoon, where you could choose a different subject.
Right.
And it could be art or, sport or something. And we used to skip that. So we used to go to the off licence and then get it back to his flat and have a bit of a party.
Excellent. Okay. That's the kind of lecturer you want. Yeah. Typical
So I
hospitality.
thought, well, this is quite good fun. I was like 17 years old.
Yeah.
And so consequently,
He's not still there.
2
He's
years
not going to be in
after-
trouble.
No. I saw him last week.
Okay.
A couple of beers.
Perfect. Yeah. Good.
And so after the 2 years catering college, I went to London. And
By that point, then you
sort of
decided, I actually like this. I'm not just avoiding
yeah,
metal
well,
work.
sort of. Yeah, I mean that was really the only option. I wasn't interested in anything else apart from a bit of fishing and
Yeah.
golf and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So
That was the route to London, and that's got to be a big change. So straight up to London, straight into a job, easy
Yeah,
to
so
get
the first
into.
job, so you write to the sort of 20 or 30 hotels and you sort of look at the acceptances, which weren't great. So the only sort of slightly interesting thing was the staff canteen at the Hilton in Park Lane.
Yeah.
All my friends, luckily, got jobs at the Grosvenor House and the Dorchester, just up the road in Park Lane. So I sort of stuck it out for 6 months and talked to my friends. We were sort of sharing a flat together, and they got me an interview at the Grosvenor House.
Okay. And this is back when it was Anton, was it, who was running it then? Anton?
Yeah,
Hellerman,
so there's
or-
Anton Edelman, Vaughan Archer was pre then.
Okay.
And so that was my next stepping stone,
Okay.
really.
Yeah.
And,
Good, inspiring kind of mentor, I suppose,
well,
Anton?
back then, sort of hotels were probably better training than restaurants because you could sort of count the good restaurants in London on one hand. So hotels were the places to go and sort of train, really.
Right. Okay. And then only 22 when you became head chef, first of all, at the Candy
Yeah,
Week,
so I
is that
did
right?
I did the Grosvenor House, then there's Oyster, sort of 2 years at each.
Right.
And then one of the sous chefs that was working in the terrace, which the English boys couldn't really get into, he was German, and he just randomly called me and said, look, do you want to come to work at Mr. Pontax, it was called.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of city restaurant with a wine bar and 2 wine bars and a restaurant. So I sort of jumped ship, went over there, and then after a few months he left. And I was sort of quite enjoying that sort of, young, sort of in a sort of restaurant that no one has heard of in the middle of the city. And he left, and I said to the boss, Philip Isles, I said, can I take his job? I was way too young, way too.
I was going to say 22 years old. That's incredible. How many covers was it? What sort of restaurant?
Well, the restaurant was kind of 40 covers.
Okay.
The wine bars are quite busy.
Yeah, and good food. That's a huge.
I sort of got the job, and then a couple of years later, we sort of got our name on the map. I didn't really know much about Michelin stars or all that sort of stuff. We didn't get a Michelin star, but we got a what was it called back then? It was a Red M Michelin Guide, which is kind of halfway. Okay. Now, I wasn't really even cooking for that. I was just cooking basically,
just enjoying it.
Yeah.
Okay. The brigade respond to you okay at that age?
Yeah, I had a sort of youngish brigade. Most of them I'd sort of worked with before at the Dorchester.
Right.
And the Grosvenor House.
Okay, amazing. That must have been good fun. What a change from West Bay to head chef in a restaurant voice. I think that's one of the exciting things about this industry is the opportunity. I don't know, is it still the same? Can you progress that quickly?
No, you can.
Hospitality?
If you've got your heart in it, it's quite easy to sort of progress in this business.
Yeah, because
you have to be full on and sort of enjoy it, and
because it's still got a reputation as being a bit of a stopgap, I think, for a lot of people.
No, it has, and I experienced that with my staff. A lot of staff are not particularly interested in what they're doing, and they move on after 6 months. Yeah, don't really take it that seriously.
Yeah, but if you've got the commitment and the talent, it's an exciting industry.
So there's a few that sort of shine and have the talent.
So you moved to La Caprice after that, was it? What was your role when you went there?
Yeah, so after sort of 4.5 years at the Mr. Pontax, the candlewhip room, my fishmonger, Tony Allen at the time, said, there's a job at the Caprice going. And I didn't really know about the Caprice or never really heard of it. So and in those days you couldn't really sort of Google and find out what's going on. You had to sort of flick through the Michelin Guide or guidebooks. And I applied for the job and got the job. Quite young. As head chef at the Caprice.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And then just at that point, they bought the Ivy, and I was sort of cooking at the Caprice as head chef. And the head chef at the Ivy wasn't quite working out, so Chris Corbin and Jeremy King said, do you fancy looking after both of them? Which I did.
How old were you at this point?
By then, I was probably, how old was I? 26 or 27 or something.
Still, fast.
Young, young and it's still quite an experience, really. But I think, if you've got your heart in it and you've had a good sort of grounding in the hotels, then you sort of know your stuff as much as you can sort of know. Whether it be carving a side of smoked salmon properly, or butchering or fish prep and that sort of stuff.
I think the cooking side of it probably stays the same. The people management side of it, though, presumably was changing.
Yeah, so that's something I had to learn and learn the hard way.
Yeah, that's more challenging, I think, when you're younger, I think, isn't it? Because with experience.
Yeah, because people management is not something that anyone teaches you at catering college or anything. So that's completely on the hoof.
And what was your style? Because the kitchen's had a reputation as being very angry.
Yeah, so I was quite lucky because working for Anton Mosman and Anton Madelman, they were sort of quite gentle. They weren't a sort of hardcore restaurant chefs. Right. So I had a sort of gentle upbringing, really.
And did that carry? Because you'd like to think that being brought up by the seaside and
so that's probably I still have that
fishing
sort of calming
and stuff,
thing. Exactly.
You'd be calm, so you're not one of the shouty chefs.
I never experienced that. Luckily.
You've been quoted as saying that Chris Corbin and Jeremy King were the best restaurateurs in the world before. Why? What was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to work with them for quite a few years.
Yeah, and 18. Something like that, was it?
Yeah. And they were great because they sort of taught you more about the sort of restaurant side than the cooking side. really. So I was kind of cooking and they were doing the restaurateuring, and you sort of learnt about the customer.
Yeah.
So I learnt a lot of things about, what goes on the plate, how you serve it, simplicity, and what the customers actually want, more importantly, at the end of the day. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of chefs that think it's all about the food, but the art of the restaurateur, as you know, because you've actually done it. It's not just about the food.
I sort of very quickly learnt that it's all about the customer and what they want, not what the chef wants the customer to eat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes you've got to say what the customer wants to buy, not just what the chef wants to cook.
So from that time, I sort of got it and understood what it's all about the customer.
Yeah, and that's an incredible.
And our customers were like good high-profile customers at that point.
Yeah. So quite demanding, presumably.
Well, somewhere.
But at least or wanting the right things. So you learn fast. You grew a lot in that time, didn't you? Can you just explain a little bit about that kind of that scaling up period?
The restaurants moved on. Chris and Jeremy bought J Sheekey, and just at that point, they'd sort of sold to Luke Johnson. So I sort of stuck in there and kept going with it. And then Luke Johnson, after about 2 years, sold to Richard Caring, and we then opened Scott's in Mayfair.
Right.
So Scott's was the sort of last restaurant I did with the Caprice group.
Okay. So over that time, how many restaurants did you open then? Because
well, we had so Caprice, Ivy, J Sheekey. We sort of inherited Daphne's, if you like, in Chelsea, the Italian restaurant.
Just some of the best restaurants in the city.
Well, exactly.
Over a period of time.
Yeah, so it's great experience and a great sort of learning curve.
Did it presumably just became your normal sort of day? Did you ever pinch yourself and think, here I am, scallop slurping school
really.
kid from West Bay, and now I'm in the best restaurants in the city?
You just get on with it and do it. Really.
Yeah. Okay. So was there any particular, from Chris and Jeremy's particular, I suppose, was there any kind of advice or anything you picked up that you then used when you created your own family restaurants? Was there a couple of
an awful lot.
In there
an awful lot, really. I mean, when I first opened my first place, the Oyster and Chop House in Smithfield.
Yeah, so 2008, that's when you decide I'm going to go
so
it alone.
There was I carried all of that stuff, the philosophy and, the food that I'd sort of developed up to then. But what I didn't want to do is actually replicate anything I'd done before, with the Caprice and Ivy group. So I wanted to do something sort of completely different. So I decided to serve oysters and meat on the bone, just at the time when there was the BSE scare and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and also an economic collapse around then as well.
Yes,
wasn't it? The economy sort of died.
Exactly. It was credit crunch time, and lots of people said, why are you sort of gambling and doing your own restaurant? The credit crunch, and I put a dessert on that was called Credit Crunch ice cream. Brilliant. And we put it on the menu in the dessert section for £1.50 a scoop.
Really?
So that was my sort of nod to the credit crunch.
You sell a lot.
But it's actually, business then actually, funny enough, was much better than it is now.
Really?
Really, because there were not a lot of restaurants around. Certainly not as many as there is now.
Okay.
And so it was, I would say, although a lot of people say it wasn't easier then, I would say it much easier then than it is now.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, well, we'll definitely come back to that. So what was your motivation, though? Because presumably then you were well-resourced, well-funded, you'd opened lots of restaurants. I'm guessing you could have got a cushy kind of exec chef role and kind of cruised around. And
I could have done.
Yeah. What made you want to kind of go off and do it yourself? And was it very different?
Well, I suppose I've always been a bit of a sort of, loner. My parents separated when I was 6. And I've always been very sort of independent in, what I did as a kid. I sort of played golf from a young age, caddied for my dad, and then he got me sort of playing golf. So I was sort of playing golf and amongst a lot of sort of seniors, so learnt a bit about etiquette and all that sort of stuff. And then became quite good at golf, got into a sort of good crowd of like-minded people who went off to, play golf professionally. And my dad wanted me to do the same thing. I sort of didn't really want to, have my career as a sort of golf pro or whatever.
Right.
I didn't actually know what I wanted to do.
No.
So that's why I ended up sort of cooking
Yeah.
which was
Okay.
ended up as my passion.
Yeah, and going out alone then and doing it off your own back, did that feel very different? I presume you had the freedom to do meat on the bone and oysters, but the actual financial side of it, had you been completely exposed to that anyway, or once it was your money,
luckily my
did it feel
business
different?
partner who we worked together, he was in finance. So I had a sort of nice balance between, the creative side and the sort of finance side.
Right.
So when
handy.
we first started,
Yeah, because it does fundamentally need to make cash, I suppose. So first day you opened, was it instantaneously successful, or did it take?
Well,
a
it
period
was
of time?
because I think people were watching me, had heard I'd left, and were interested in what I was doing and what I was up to.
And that simplicity of the food, again, you've been said, there should only be three primary ingredients, I think, on the plate. Was that different? Had you always done that, or were you able to do that a lot more under your own?
The more I progressed and sort of learnt more about food and started writing about food, I sort of learnt about, main ingredients and where food came from, and sort of developed this philosophy of, no more than 3 ingredients on the plate. Sometimes 1 ingredient.
Yeah. Okay. Clearly it worked because it wasn't long. Was the next one down here? Was this the next restaurant?
Yep. So the Oyster and Chop House in Smithfield was the first.
Yeah.
And then this site came up down in Dorset.
Okay.
And it was, I got a phone call from this guy called Carl one day, who used to run the trampolines and rowing boats in the river down in West Bay.
Yeah.
So Mark, I've got a restaurant you might be interested in down in Lyme Regis.
It was already a restaurant, or?
It was, and then the land was subsiding, so they sort of rebuilt the whole thing, and he sort of rebuilt this restaurant, not intending to sort of do it himself, but to sort of sell it on.
Did he have you in mind?
Well, yeah, he phoned me, and I went down and saw it for the first time and said, "Yep, okay, we'll take it."
Amazing.
So that was a perfect sort of second site, really, with a good story.
Had you been planning on coming back to the
to
the coast, or yeah, because by then you'd been predominantly in London for a long time.
Yeah, I was kind of fixed in London, really.
Happy.
So that was my sort of introduction back to, Dorset.
Okay. Strategy at this point, because then Soho was next, I think, was it? And have you, was this kind of planned? Did you always know you would open a number?
No,
or did
not really.
opportunity just present?
It was kind of, things came up, and, Soho was something that I was walking past one day with my business partner, Ratnish.
Yeah.
And there was a for sale sign, so we contacted the agent, went and had a look, and it sort of opened and failed within about 12 months.
Yeah.
So we contacted the agent, we bartered, on the lease, and we ended up getting a really good sort of premium, which, affected a lot of the premiums in sort of Soho area at the time. And we opened it, it was really successful, and it's still just about open today.
Is it? Okay, because well, touching on that, and you mentioned just now the kind of the change in the trade, because you've closed a few restaurants as well as opened a few restaurants.
Yeah,
I suppose.
yeah. And
does that mean they've all not worked, or?
Yeah, because you open restaurants and you're on a roll, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I had a restaurant in a hotel in Belgravia that a friend of mine had introduced me to the owner, and we opened it, and Belgravia is a funny place. And I lost an awful lot of money in about 11 months.
Wow.
So we kind of sort of got out without signing the lease. And
too high cost, too few customers, all of the above?
The costs, the usual stuff. The costs were high, the revenue wasn't great, it's very inconsistent.
Right.
And we lost a shitload of money.
Yeah. Much as I am sorry, I see that look in your eye, but I think it's kind of reassuring.
But those things are a learning curve.
Yeah, well, and it's reassuring to us mere mortals.
All the money in the previous years you might have made, you sort of lose in one go in about 11 months. Yeah.
But I think for average Joe Blogs out there who sets up a restaurant, if Mark Hix can have a restaurant that doesn't do so well occasionally, then we feel less bad when we come up with an idea that doesn't work. So I've had to close a couple of places over the years, and it's heartbreaking because in your head you can kind of you see it and you have the vision and you build it and you imagine it's going to be full of people, and then we ran one for 6 years trying to make it work, and in the end you have to go, I'm gonna let this baby go now. But it's
and we opened another one in the city in Devonshire Square, which didn't quite work out. And to sort of I sort of changed the concept a couple of times within the sort of 2.5 years over there, and ended up having to sort of give the landlord £500,000
wow
to give it back to him, basically.
Wow,
So
yeah, fitted out.
we'd lost quite a lot of money in the space of sort of 2 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, and off the back of that, does it make you, is there a perfect number of Mark Hix restaurants? Are you at a comfortable level
Not really.
now,
It's not about the amount of restaurants. I think it's about where they are, you
Right.
know, really. And London's getting tougher and tougher.
Mm.
So it's, London's tough. You
Yeah.
know, Soho, they've doubled our rent, for example.
Wow, really? Doubled?
Yeah. And the business rates have gone,
in one rent review?
crazy.
Or just over?
Yeah, in one review. Yeah.
Jeez. Okay. So, it's been fascinating, I suppose, watching it from outside of London. But what's the reason? Is it rates is clearly one of them, or rents? But you've also seemed to have, a huge amount more supply now. And is that supply?
Yeah,
do you think
yeah.
the consumer kind of choice is changing? Because we now seem to have these kind of rollout chain concepts in a way that we never had years ago.
It's a combination of stuff, So in Soho, for example, in Berwick Street, there's probably 40 street traders who can just open. They probably don't have to abide by the same health and safety, EHO stuff as we do. They can just open shop, cook, decent food, 7 or 8 quid a portion. And that certainly, affects, I'm sure, a lot of restaurants in Soho.
Yeah. And that's a changing consumer demand, because at one point, I suppose, it started off with fine dining, and then it went to, at least a la carte, a little bit more kind of casual, and now we've ended up at street food. I wonder how much of it has come from the consumer, or how much of it comes from London VCs that decide they're going to roll out a chain of restaurants, and the consumer ends up almost sort of subconsciously compromising, I suppose, and eating food that's nowhere near as good because it's all been made in a centralised kitchen. Do you have any thoughts around
there's
that
lots
side
of
of the
that.
sector?
There's lots of that as well, yeah. I mean, sort of chain restaurants open, and yes, they produce food in centralised kitchens, but...
Yeah. Does that
And, a lot of the consumers aren't that sort of, discerning, really. So a lot of them don't know the difference between good, mediocre, or, inconsistent bad food.
Yeah.
So.
And that I find that as a restaurateur frustrating, that we can care about, having food cooked by a brigade of human beings, chefs who actually know their craft, who actually know the provenance of where that food comes from. And we'll come on to this in a little bit with food rots and the provenance of food. But why is it that on one level we seem to have got better in the UK around food? Go back a long time and we didn't have a great reputation. Now we've got a reputation as being one of the best places in the world.
Yep.
Yet at the same time, you don't go across to Europe and notice the same chain restaurant on every street corner. How have we got that juxtaposition?
Well, I think London, like sort of New York and LA and probably Sydney and Melbourne, sort of welcome lots of different types of cuisine in. Paris certainly doesn't do that. A lot of the cities in Italy don't do that. If you go to Paris, you'll be hard pushed to get a decent Indian meal or Italian meal, or But London has probably cuisines from 150 different countries.
Yeah. And that's great, I think, isn't it? Because that makes a potential melting point
so much choice in London,
and innovation, I think, is great. Again, it's come up a lot in this podcast that one of the reasons we're eventually good. William Curley was chatting it with chocolate. If that you're in France or in Belgium, you're probably expected to follow the traditions of your trade and the heritage of your trade. And actually, if you become too innovative and too revolutionary, you'll kind of be almost kicked out of the profession. Whereas in England, because we have this mishmash of different cultures,
you can get away with all sorts of things.
Yeah, you can get away with having all. But if the downside is, the consumer ends up not knowing what's good and what's bad, and the fact that their chicken's been flown in from Thailand and injected full of salty water to make it heavier, and your prawns are all grown in a big vat in Vietnam and full of antibiotics and stuff. So that ends up irritating me. I don't think you don't look irritated, Mark, but that's because you're sat overlooking the ocean with a glass of wine. So I'm going to be irritated, and you can be chilled out. The other thing you're really well known for is art. So you opened the Tram Shed, which is a pretty unusual building. What motivated you to convert that?
Yeah, so the Tram Shed was an interesting building. Someone that I sort of knew fairly well, called me one day. He'd actually bought the building.
It was literally a generator building or something.
Yeah. So it was a generator building for the trams, that operated in London
ideal.
back in the sort of early 1900s.
Yeah.
And fantastic building. I used to live literally around the corner, 2 minutes away.
Yeah.
And I walked past that building every day. And when he offered it to me, I thought, okay, this is a great opportunity to do a big restaurant, and didn't really know what I was going to do then. And then I just suddenly thought, steakhouses are sort of, coming together in London, but no one's really done chicken. So the focus was sort of, whole roast chickens and different cuts of steak.
Well received?
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
I was panicking, all the way up to opening.
Yeah.
Especially when I decided to put a big Damien Hirst cow in formaldehyde in the restaurant.
It looks amazing.
And it sort of was a big success from the beginning. So, even vegetarians used to book in and sit under the cow and eat our vegetarian menu. Yeah, so.
That's good going, because that's the sort of place they'd end up boycotting. Did you know Damien anyway? Because we
know each other for years.
Yeah, you were already excited by that, because not just him, but you've now got quite a lot of art, I think, in there, and it's known as an art.
So not in the tram shed necessarily, but in the other restaurants, I always make the art a part of the decor.
Yeah. Do you think that's important to the kind of how a space feels?
No, I think so. Yeah, because there's always a story behind it. So I've always had that thing, working for Corbin and King, of a whole part of the makeup of the decor is about, what people look at in the restaurant, which is the artwork.
Okay, yeah. I think that's the bit that people miss on, particularly in hotels. Hotels used to have a terrible, just ability to recognise that their lighting was bright, and then, they didn't have any music at all, and they had these very staid restaurants. And I guess that's one thing that certainly the casual sector's done well, is it makes places feel more relaxed, and it's changed the bars and it's changed the lighting, which is so important. So we touched a little, through all of this, was the provenance of food something that was always important to you, or was that something that grew over time?
Well, it's only when I started writing about food, I think, probably 16, 17 years ago. So the minute I started writing about food, I was more curious about where food came from.
Okay. What was the trigger to make you want to write about it?
I just sort of fancied writing, really.
Yeah.
And someone I knew, who was the food editor for The Independent, Caroline Stacey, called me one day and said, Simon Hopkinson is leaving after 8 or 9 years. Would you like to take over his column? So I did. And I'd never written a regular sort of newspaper column before. And
not many people have.
No. So sort of cracked on and did it. And, 13 years later, I was still doing it.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, The Independent folded up, and that was it. But that was a great opportunity, really, to sort of write about food, investigate food, and get a sort of good handle on, where food comes from and what people want.
It's interesting, isn't it? And Interesting Doors Opens, that sounds very similar to this story with doing the podcast, where I wanted to go around and meet, say, not just the people who actually produce the food or the restaurateurs, but what I've learned about where our milk comes from and where our animal products come from, and rare breed charcuterie with Capriolus down the road, and the English wine scene. So it's interesting what the trigger is, although I was always interested. Did you find in the kitchen in the early days it was harder to get British and sort of local produce?
Yeah, when I first started in London, you didn't really know where the food came from.
Right.
So, when I was sort of 20 years old, you cooked whatever, carrots, asparagus, salad stuff, but didn't really know quite where it came from. So it was only much later in life that I, sort of became interested in actually where food came from, and then started having a very sound understanding that, our menus should be based around British food, and what's the point of importing, stuff from abroad when it's all on our doorstep. So that kind of got me going. Really.
Yeah. And why do you think that's important? Because I've had conversations with chefs in the past, and the only thing they care about is how food tastes, and that's it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily is the provenance of the food in the States, although they often do go together, not always. So why do you think, where food's from is important?
Well, I think when you start writing about food and you start understanding food and its provenance, then you start thinking, okay, well, this guy up north or whatever, is producing great sprouting broccoli and shallots and whatever. And, in the past, we've always imported it. But, we need to support these guys. Then I come across chicken farmers and, people that are, producing really good stuff. And suddenly started realising, actually, we, all of us, whether we're professional chefs or the general public, need to start, supporting our British farmers.
Mm. And do you think people care?
Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
And I discovered that along the way as well. I always remember doing many years ago doing a cookery demo in, I think it was Christchurch Food Festival.
Yep.
And there was a little sort of farmer's market there. There was a local asparagus grower. And right behind him was a little deli, sort of farm shop sort of thing. And he was selling his locally grown asparagus. And I went in the farm shop and they were selling Spanish asparagus. And I asked them why they were selling Spanish when this guy outside grows it like 4 miles away. And they said, well, the customer's not prepared to pay an extra £1 a bunch for something that's grown locally. They want to, they're sort of price driven, which is sad.
It is, yeah. And it's actually, there are 3 or 4 reasons, again, why I do this, but that's one of the key ones, is that, the passion and the love that some people have got for whatever their niche is, and there's so many providers. What I think it's a privilege as a restaurateur that all you've really got to do is find incredible suppliers, find incredible producers.
And it's very easy on menus to, and it makes the menu look a bit more sexy when you've kind of, name checked the producer or the grower on the menu. And suddenly you're sort of educating the punters.
Yeah, and there's no way, in the same way that I employ better chefs than I am, and better cocktail barmen than I am, and there's no way that you can possibly just love every single ingredient the same way that a dedicated professional.
No, exactly, and now compared to 15, 20 years ago, we can now have fantastic English spirits. So most, at least 50% of our spirits in our cocktails and our back bar stuff are British.
Yeah, well, you're even wearing a Black Cow T-shirt. So,
exactly.
Jason, who's also, I've also interviewed. So, which I think is fascinating, the fact that you can make vodka from milk. But
and that again is a very interesting thing that and it's unique in the UK at the moment. I'm sure more people will start doing it, but he's from a family of cheesemakers and dairy farmers.
Yeah, barbers.
So having or producing a vodka that's made from the byproduct of that for centuries was actually thrown down the drain.
Yeah, incredible.
It's a great thing.
Yeah, the open air dairy guys that I was telling you about earlier, all of their milk goes to barbers to make the cheese. So that's part of their supply chain, and the fact that the cows are out in the field all year means that they're always eating beautiful kind of clovers and herbs and grasses, and it affects the flavours of the cheese. So it's all linked, but all too often. We were chatting, not you and I, but the farmer earlier about, American cheese and the fact that they have such an intensively reared kind of ecosystem for the cows, and therefore the cheese is just, kind of rubbish. And I hope that by having these conversations, people will care more. And I hope that the restaurants that celebrate that and, supply that local produce benefit more than, again, these
we're lucky in the UK. I mean, we have, great dairy. Great dairy farmers, and consequently, we have great cheeses.
Yeah, and some of the best animal kind of welfare standards and stuff in the world as well.
You can do a cheese board and give it to a Frenchman, and they wouldn't know that it's from the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, and same with charcuterie. It used to be, 10, 20 years ago, all charcuterie seemed to come from the continent, all cheeses seemed to come from the continent. But it goes back to my earlier question, I suppose. But you've noticed that you can get it all in the UK, and then was that an instantaneous change then, where you decided that you'd roll that out across your restaurants?
Yeah, the more research you do, the more people that send you things, to sort of try, then you suddenly quickly understand that actually, we have great things on our doorsteps.
Yeah, and you've taken that to, not an extreme necessarily, but certainly a pretty decent level with Food Rock. So can you just explain what that is and how that came about?
So for years and years, I've been doing little tiny food festivals around the country, and which is sort of great. And they sort of showcase local producers. So I decided, when I got the restaurant down here, that we should do our own little festival. We've got a great setting overlooking the sea.
Certainly have. It's not all done in your garden.
No, and we have great produce, and you can include Devon and Dorset and Somerset in that. And suddenly it sort of took off. So this is our 7th year.
7th year. Yeah. Wow. Okay. You have some help as you've been organising that, because that
must
be a huge
so some of my old colleagues like Joe, really make it happen, and we have lots of support, and the more popular it gets, the more people that want to come on board and come and share their wares.
Yeah, and do you have a criteria as to who's in and who's out as to food producers?
Yeah, well, we do vet them. I mean, we don't get generic cheese producers that put cranberries and walnuts in their cheese, and
hypothetically.
So they need to be full on proper producers.
Right. You go out and source them,
Whether
or
it's-
people will come to you now, presumably?
Well,
and say,
yeah, so most of them I know anyway.
Yeah.
And then we get some new ones that pop up and they say, can we come and show? And,
Yeah. So that's a 2-day event?
Yep.
Okay. And then there's demos.
So we do demos, and it's normally, chefs I know. So I get some people sort of comparing. So Steve Lamb, who works with the River Cottage, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
And he's done it the last couple of years. And, chefs, most of them are sort of West Country based, but we get a few from London down.
Okay.
And it's just a good fun event for everyone. Yeah.
Learn them down the other way. And are you you're involved? Are you cooking?
Yeah,
are you on the stage?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. I'm on the stage with nearly every one of them. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what you're making this year, or does it depend? Is it predominantly
I never
fish,
plan.
or? Never plan. Does
I never
it depend
plan.
what comes in on the day boats?
Yeah. So what I've done recently, the last 2 years, is focused on bycatch.
Okay. Excellent.
Which is, it's a big thing. So Lyme Bay was made into it was the first marine reserve by the Blue Marine Foundation. So by that, we support the local fishermen. They can fish in season, out of season for different species. And the last couple of years, I thought, we should just do bycatch and make all the chefs that are doing demos use the bycatch. So a bycatch could be, it's a non-targeted species. So a bycatch could be one single turbot or brill that someone that's fishing for sea bass caught in the nets. So that's technically a bycatch.
Yeah.
It could be gurnard, it could be mackerel, whiting, gurnard, whatever.
Yeah.
So then it sort of puts the chefs on the spot a bit and makes them think about what they're going to cook.
Okay. And that's challenging in restaurants, because I think we could go down the rabbit hole of fishing policy, but it's complicated, I think, isn't it? Quotas on what you're allowed to catch. You've got to go out there and you've got a certain quota to catch bass. You catch the wrong fish, you've got to throw
exactly.
it back in the sea.
And I sort of, a lot of the local fishermen are good friends of mine. And I sort of totally understand and get where they're coming from, but they've all sort of abided by the rules and changed their techniques, some of them. So some of them have changed from, netting to potting for cuttlefish, for example.
Yeah.
And different times of the year they'll fish for different things, which is actually what it should be all about, especially someone like this, because there are some fantastic opportunities not to just fish for one species. And when the Blue Marine Foundation banned sort of trawling within 8 miles, that sort of changed the whole fishing thing here. So anglers were suddenly starting to catch cod on the reefs, when cod had sort of completely different, disappeared. So it kind of changed the whole thing.
Okay. But that was part of national policy to not put a fish within 8
No,
miles? Or
it was really the sort of Blue Marine Foundation making it into a reserve.
Right.
And banning trawling within sort of 8 miles.
Wow.
Really.
Okay.
So...
Yeah, because there used to be a lot of scallops from Lyme Bay as well, I think, wasn't there? And then they were banned because a lot of scallops are caught by dredging the ocean.
Well,
bed
the dredging was banned.
Right.
But now there's some good scallop divers.
Right.
That
All hand dived.
and the beds have revived.
Really?
The ones that got trashed in the old days by the trawlers and the dredgers.
Right.
So they're now getting good quantities of scallops.
Yeah. I saw them come back on the availability, I suppose, through the local suppliers, and was wondering how they'd got around it, because they disappeared for a couple of years.
But it's still a season, in season and out of season. So, for example, there'll be maybe about 3 or 4 months here which is a closed season where they can't dive for scallops.
Right.
But 2 miles down the road in Devon, on the Devon coast, they can then fish there for them. So you sort of let the land rest.
Yeah, perfect.
And then
in that period when you couldn't buy local and hand dive was too expensive, certainly in our restaurants, we ended up getting from the US. And although I'm always a big fan of using local, they seem to have that farming approach in the US where they would do exactly that. They would treat each part of the seabed. They wouldn't go back to it for 10 years. So they'd cordon off an area and go, right, we'll fish here this year.
Which is a good thing.
We'll
And I think the local fishermen are understanding that more and more. And because at the end of the day, it's not just their livelihood, but it's their next generation.
Absolutely.
As well.
Again, so a lot of fishermen. What's the consensus? Is there less fish? I suppose you've touched on that, really. But when you were a kid, there were no restrictions. People could fish anywhere. Was there more fish then, or now? Or has that changed?
There were probably more fish then, but now it is quite hit and miss. Some of my friends who fish for bass, for example, have a great day on one of the wrecks, will return to the same wreck the next day with 0.
Right.
But the interesting thing that's happened here is a few years ago, someone in Devon, one of the fishermen who had a certain size boat that was allowed to net within a certain region, a certain mileage from the shore, started catching anchovies.
Oh, okay.
And the last 3 or 4 years here, there's been a lot of sightings of bluefin tuna
Oh, really?
off the Dorset and Devon coast.
Right.
I sort of witnessed one once. I was taking my boat from Lyme to West Bay, and I saw this big fish quite close in, sort of jumping straight out of the water. You know, we see a lot of dolphins here.
You do, didn't you? Yeah.
But it wasn't a dolphin because they don't sort of dive straight out of the water.
Right.
And that was a tuna.
Wow.
And then there's been lots of sightings. You know, if you go on YouTube now, you can see lots of, you know, big shoals of tuna and big tuna, like, you know, 600 pounders
Really?
that used to exist, you know, in the sort of 1920s, 1930s on the East Coast when the herring fishery was really abundant. And the tuna used to feed on the herrings, and then the herrings disappeared, and the tuna disappeared.
Okay, so that's exciting. So why are they back then?
Well, yeah, people started catching herrings again, so you never know what the tuna are, you know, chasing. You know, but it's normally stuff like herring or mackerel or stuff like that, and water temperatures have changed.
And then do you get a gist with the local consensus that the fishing industry was pretty famous at the point of the vote through for Brexit about the issues of the kind of European Commission and quotas and the restrictions? Is there a general kind of optimism now in the local fishing, or are they still concerned? Or
I don't know. I think the local fishermen kind of get on with it. Yeah. You know, I mean, I think whether we do or don't, you know, let trawlers and fishermen in from, you know, across the water, you know, it'll happen when it happens, but they just have to get on with what they do and their livelihood.
Yeah. And you've just written a book all about fishing as well, Hooked.
Yeah, so it's not really a recipe book. It's more about my sort of fishing stories over the last sort of 20 odd years. Fishing experiences, you know, catching, not catching. Most of the time, not catching.
Yeah.
You know, you get a very famous rivers where, you know, which are prolific for sort of salmon and stuff, and you end up sort of turning up at the wrong time when the water's too low or whatever, and you don't catch anything. So it's just fishing stories, but some of them are, you know, good stories about, you know, fishing abroad in the Bahamas for bonefish and that sort of stuff, and just different experiences over the years. Because wherever I travel, I always take my fishing rod.
Yeah, I think I read that one of your favourite things about fishing is that you can buy a lot of kit. Is that? You've got a lot of toys.
Most people that are keen on fishing have way too much kit.
Yeah,
and it's one of those addictive things. You know, you get to a tackle shop and you get sort of lured in and end up buying things you don't really need, but it ends up in your tackle box.
Yeah, and you've got the I was going to say that, well, the opportunity, I suppose, if you like kit, that you need a set of kit for London and a set of kit for down here as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You still get out. Happens, yeah. You still get out regularly.
Yeah, fishing? As much as I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Food Rocks as well works with a couple of charities. It's RNLI and what was the other one?
Fisherman's Mission.
Yeah. Okay, great. Why? Why?
Well, I think being on the coast, you know, it's the sort of seaworthy charities. You know, the RNLI is an obvious one because that, you know, is, you know, that's here, and, you know, people get rescued all the time. Not just people that are fishing, but people that are out on the boats that, you know, don't check the weather conditions or tides and stuff. People walking along the beach that don't know if the tide's coming in or out, and often get rescued, you know, when the tide comes in, and they get rescued from the cliffs. But also in London, it's quite important. You know, the River Thames, you know, there's quite a big lifeboat thing going on there, and people don't really connect the River Thames with, you know, the RNLI. I did a whitebait dinner for the local Thames lifeboat crew about 3 years ago, and I was sort of chatting to them. I said, you know, how often do you get called out? You know, and during that dinner, they got called out twice that night.
On the Thames?
Yeah.
Really?
And it's normally people that, you know, throw themselves off the bridges that don't know what they're doing. And there was one particular occasion where the lifeboat crew, a few weeks previous, were on their boat ready to go out, and someone landed on the deck of the boat that had jumped off the bridge. that didn't really look where they were going. So he literally travelled from Germany apparently and chucked himself off the bridge, landed straight in the lifeboat.
They were waiting for him, or that was just coincidence?
No, it was just coincidence.
Wow, is that worse? I don't know. Landing in the water or landing on the boat?
At least he was in good safe company.
Good hands once they were.
He broke a few limbs, but
putting them back together. Okay. Do you know Conker Gin? Do you use Conker? Because they've just done a partnership with the INLI, haven't they? Chucking in the bottles as well. So.
Yeah, so we sort of, we support, a lot of the local distillers and stuff, and we're lucky around here. We have Somerset cider brandy, Julian Temple, Black Cow, Conker, Salcombe gin.
Any good wine down here this way yet?
Great ones. Yeah. I mean, within probably about 5 or 6 miles, we've got 3 or 4 very, very good sparkling wines.
All sparkling.
Yeah.
Still, yeah.
And I'm doing a collaboration with Rob Corbett from Castlewood.
Right.
Robin Hudson, my fishing buddy.
Yeah.
We're doing a still wine with Robin. Yeah.
Are you? Okay, from the pig. Yeah. Okay, excellent. That would be fun. So what dates, Food Rocks, do you remember off the top of your
It's
head?
the first week in September.
First week in September?
Weekend, yeah.
Okay. And mainly locals, or you get a lot of tourists coming down and booking?
Yeah, so the great
thing
thing is it attracts a lot of locals and it attracts a bit of tourism as well.
Right.
So, you get a real mixture of people from all over the place.
Free event?
Yep.
Just rock up and there's stalls, you can buy food, watch the demos.
Exactly, yeah. So they can watch demos free of charge, and, we encourage them to sort of buy local produce and local wines, sparkling wines.
Yeah. Amazing. It's got a great reputation. I will make sure that I'm here this year. I've not been before, which is crazy.
You should.
You're not too far away, but I'll come. And in doing the research for it and seeing all the amazing brands that come, it's great. Any particular? I don't want to say favourites because I'm sure you love them all, but any particular stories or any particular brands that you?
No, not really. I mean, I think the great thing is that all of the local sparkling wine producers rock up and are there. There's no competition because they're all doing their own thing. A bit like if you're in France. In the sort of Champagne region, there's no sort of competition. They all do what they can do.
Yeah, I was chatting to Simon from Wines GB a little while ago, and he was saying the good thing at the moment, and it might change if we manage to produce enough, but on a global level, or certainly on a European level, we produce actually so little sparkling wine. It's kind of a win for any sparkling wine. It's a win for everybody because the more we can get British people to know about sparkling wine, and certainly any export kind of opportunities, and a lot of it
and the
seems
sort of hurdle at the moment is really, people still have this perception that because it's English sparkling wine, they sort of compare it with things like Prosecco. Different thing. Yeah, they should be comparing it with champagne.
Absolutely.
Because we have the same conditions, the same challenges with weather and harvest and all that sort of stuff, and the production method is identical. So there's no reason why the English sparkling wine should be any cheaper than some of the big champagne houses. Yeah, or the small champagne houses.
And it's that seems to be the part of the wine. I suppose it's a more forgiving process making sparkling wine than trying to make the reds and the whites. Do you think we'll ever get the kind of red wines going in the UK as well?
I've had some good red wines, but then sort of bought them in and they haven't been that great. So I think, that's something for the future, red wines, and switching the grapes around and growing different grapes.
Yeah. Maybe learning.
So the white wines and the sparkling are the thing, really.
Yeah. It's the same soil, apparently. It comes under from the Champagne region, comes under the Channel, and comes out certainly further east. Is that the same down
all the
here?
way? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a line from sort of Sussex all the way down here, which is very, very similar to the Champagne growing regions. Yeah.
Just not this year. They're going to be disappointed so far this year. But last year would have been a
well, exactly. But if we get a hot spell, I mean, you've got olives growing right next to you. Look.
I have. Yeah, you've got a lot of olive trees. So you'll have Giles from Olives of Cows, another one that we interviewed. He'll be coming round and picking them. Yeah, not so much fruit.
Hopefully they'll survive through the rest of the summer.
Yeah,
and they might turn themselves into nice little juicy olives. Who knows?
Talking a little bit, we talked about it with fish and sustainability. What's your thoughts on the, I suppose, have you noticed it in your own restaurants, but the growth of the, eating less meat, shall we say, whether you go full vegan or you go more plant-based, but there seems to be this, certainly, even with the World Health, I think it was, kind of global diet, looking at it a couple of months ago, encouraging people to cut down on meat consumption. Have you noticed it in your restaurants, and have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for years and years now, we've offered a sort of vegan and vegetarian menu. And I get it. I'm not anti-vegan or vegetarianism. I mean, in fact, I'm in the process of writing a vegan book. And
Are you really?
I'm the most unlikely person
I was going to say I'm surprised by that. To be fair,
write a vegan book, but I've got all the knowledge of vegetables and their provenance and where they come from. So there's no reason why, as a meat eater and a big, flyer of the provenance of meat and local fish, that I shouldn't write a vegan book, really. Because actually, I just find cooking vegan food is just as interesting as cooking meat and fish.
Yeah, that's unusual, I would say, with chefs. So I think it's great. I think it's important, and but I would say so much of the kind of classic history of the the culinaire and the French kind of sauces and the stocks and all that kind of stuff comes from a heavy meat background. Has that changed because of your kind of, like you say again, the writing and the learning about?
No,
food
not really.
Has that been the motivation?
I think you have to be aware of what what people want these days. And actually you can spin it around a bit and actually cook decent vegan food, interesting vegan food, and cut out the butter, cut out the cream, cut out the proteins, and we have great vegetables on our doorsteps. Yeah, so
it's good. I think it's exciting because I think if chefs like you can start to do that, then you are. I don't know whether it's a good thing. It's just a thing, but I guess you're inspirational to a lot of chefs, and a lot of chefs will follow your work. And I think they have a lot of chefs still, for me, I suppose in the same way as the public, I guess it can become quite divisive, especially with vegan. I think kind of the growth in plant-based food and the health, and I think the trouble is with vegan sometimes is it puts it turns the debate into something very angry. So instead of actually being a debate around nutrition or around great food or around what you can do with vegetables or the beautiful food that's available, it becomes too polarizing.
Yeah, so also, exactly. And I think you need a lot of vegetarians and vegans don't always have the right knowledge of rearing cattle and poultry and fishing and that sort of stuff. And I always love talking to vegans and vegetarians about why, when you're looking at leather shoes.
yeah. Or what car they turned up in. That's why I think it's important. I eat a lot less meat and dairy than I used to, but I also recognise, I don't know, the complexity around, and certainly if you are going to eat meat or dairy, or even if you're just interested in food, then the provenance of that food and where it comes from, and again, just as said earlier about being with the open air dairy guys, but seeing how their animals are looked after
and actually how to cook it.
Yeah. So what you're doing to make vegetables interesting then? Because people's perception is that it's...
Well, there's all sorts. I mean, there's, mushrooms are one of those great things that actually, have a very good sort of meaty content, if you like.
Yeah.
And, I've done vegan dinners, like 5-course vegan dinners for like 30, 40 people, for artists and stuff. And
by request or just to demonstrate?
No, just because I wanted to do it, really, because the artist is vegan, and why shouldn't you sort of showcase, vegan food? Yeah. And at the end of the meal, no one really notices that you've actually give them, 4 or 5 courses of vegan food.
Yeah. Okay. Does any of that come from a motivation of recognising that that it's probably there's a necessity in some ways that if we all eat beef 3 times a day and there's going to be 10 billion people on planet Earth, that it's not sustainable, or is that
I don't think about it in that way, but it's
just purely from a food sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is really cooking vegan and vegetarian food is it's being a bit experimental and a bit of common sense.
Yeah, I think,
and actually cooking really nice food without using meat or fish.
Yeah, it's good. I've certainly been able to judge chefs. I think we've been very guilty in our restaurants before of being a little bit lazy with the veggies food, but I think you can tell a lot about a chef if they make the vegetarian food interesting, because I think there's just a need to be a little bit more creative to give it the kind of the flavours and the depth and the consistency that still makes it feel like a bit of a treat, because not many people go out to a restaurant and just think, I'm just going to have a salad. Yeah. They want a certain element of comfort food and to feel like they've had something gratifying. And I think to do that at the moment, maybe just because of less experience, I don't know, is it less experience, or is it actually harder to do it with vegetables than it is?
No, not at all. I actually think there's more opportunities to be creative with vegetables than meat and fish.
Right.
Because you quite often, garnish a meat or fish dish with vegetables. Whereas, with vegetarian and vegan food, you're actually focusing on the main ingredient. So, like I do with a meat or fish main ingredient, you might focus on asparagus or Jerusalem artichokes or, a penny bun mushroom or, whatever. So there's no difference.
Yeah. It reignited my passion for food, I guess, having restaurants, and I don't have the same gift that you have in the kitchen, so I didn't feel the need to be cooking myself. But once I was surrounded by chefs, I let the chefs cook for me. But actually getting more interested in the sort of whole food, plant-based, and the health implications of that. Actually, I'd never really cooked with all of the beans and the lentils and the nuts and the seeds and all the stuff that's out there. So it kind of got me back into cooking again, just kind of experiment.
And I think a lot of vegans and vegetarians get a bit, overzealous on the nuts and the seeds, really. And we don't need to. Why not focus on the actual vegetable itself, whether it's going above the ground or underground or really. Because I think a lot of, health shops, there's shelves and shelves of seeds and nuts and stuff, which actually, should be fed to the birds, really, rather than focusing on the actual fresh ingredient.
Okay. From a nutritional perspective or from a flavour perspective?
Both, really, yeah.
Okay.
You don't need to use seeds and nuts to introduce flavour to a vegetable. A carrot, for example. You can have a fantastic dish with a plate of roasted carrots. And do very little to it.
Come on, Mark. How do you make them?
Let me do. I mean, you can introduce something like a cumin seed, which is everyone's favourite spice. If you go to a curry house, the most addictive thing there is the cumin in the background of the curry spice mix. But if you just simply roasted carrots with cumin and some good olive oil.
Yeah, good enough. Any other favourite vegan dishes whilst you're making me salivate?
Well, just recently I've made a fresh sort of green pea tofu, which is good. So it's not tofu in strictly the soybean sense of the word, but comes out exactly the same.
How do you make that?
With green pea flour. Put some blended fresh peas in it. Set it, and it doesn't come out like rock hard, so that you can dice it up, but you just sort of scoop it, a bit like a sort of creme fraiche consistency.
Okay. Not in any of your recipe books yet?
I've been making it. Not yet.
So when's I was going to say, when's the vegan one coming out?
Don't know. Who knows? Soon.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm halfway through it.
Are you started it? Okay, excellent. That's good. And I think. Yeah, no, I think it's great. If you're going to do one on fish, do one on plants as well. So, I think from a planetary perspective, I think we're all becoming more aware that we need to try and have less of an impact. So that's good. Again, I guess you're well known in the trade. I would imagine, and well known to the public as well. But from a business advice perspective, if you see people who want to come into hospitality, it's well known as being a really challenging industry for particularly entrepreneurship wise. If you're setting up your own place, do you have any advice that you give people? Either advice that you've heard over the years where you go, that's just garbage. I'm driving actually, so don't worry. I'm just very kindly being offered another glass of wine, much as I could stay all afternoon.
I've got a fly in my glass.
But thank you. Any advice?
I normally say don't do it.
Yeah, well, likewise. Yeah, let's say that they go through that stage. I suppose one is, why don't do it? And then if you are going to do it, what's the
It's
key
just very hard. Yeah, I mean, I've been brought up in hospitality and catering and stuff, and it does get harder and harder. There's a lot of challenges.
The industry, or because you get older?
Everything, yeah. The industry, the amount of restaurants that are opening, so it's not as easy as it was maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, I agree with you.
So I think anyone out there that's thinking of opening a restaurant, because it might look easy from the outside, think twice.
Why?
Think twice, 3 times.
3 times, yeah. Well, I would share that. So yeah, get in touch with both of us. So why is it so much harder? Is it? Yeah.
Well, there's all of the challenges. There's the choice and competition, if you want to call it competition. There's the landlords, especially in London, that actually don't think twice about doubling your rent. There's the business rates that just escalate, and suddenly the business that was sort of quite healthy suddenly becomes a business that you're struggling to break even.
Yeah, I share that pain. I might have another glass of wine if you carry on, because yeah.
But it's not, you know, when you first open a restaurant and it's all flying and stuff, like 10 years later, you know, things change.
So let's say they say, no, I'm going to do it anyway, Mark. Thanks, Mark,
I would
for your
just say
advice.
good luck.
Yeah. Any other, is there a key tip though? Is there a little bit of, magic that you would say, whatever you do, don't forget this?
Not really. I think we've kind of covered all of the advice that might or might not work. But
cool. If people want to find out more about you, obviously they can buy your latest book, Hooked, which looks great. But if they want to find out
which is more of a good read than a recipe book, but there are some recipes thrown in.
Excellent.
So
And then if they want to find out about Food Rocks website or
Food
follow
Rocks,
you more,
it's on our website.
Okay, what's the
website?
website?
It's happening in September. It's Hix Restaurants.
Okay. And then are you avid on social media? Are you a particularly fan of people following you on there? Are you a ranter?
Social media is one of those things that you kind of almost have to do these days, and whether it makes a big impact on your business or not is a questionable subject.
Yeah.
But we'll do it. And
you personally though, are you on Twitter, or do you leave?
Well,
it
we
to
do
your
Twitter for
marketing
business.
team for the
we
business
do
more
Instagram because everyone does Instagram.
Okay. You personally though, not so much. Or?
Yeah, personally and through the business. Yeah.
Okay. So perfect. All right. Well, I'll put some links through to the relevant stuff in the show notes as well. But thanks, Mark, for sparing the time, and I'll see you at the festival. And
thank you.
Thanks for letting me invade your house. Cheers.
Thank you.
So there you have it. You have reached the end of another episode of the Humans of Hospitality podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please go and visit our website, humansofhospitality.co.uk, for the show notes and extra episodes and information. And whilst you're there, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and to receive free materials all about the humans behind our incredible industry. Lastly, if you could subscribe, rate and review this podcast, you will be massively helping me out, and it would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much. We'll be launching another podcast in just 7 days' time. Cheers.